So now if we had Will, okay, so this general posture of his upper body, if he was at full anchor point, so full front foot contact at this posture, equal opposite, trunk neutral, we're cooking. You're probably looking at an extra 4 to 6 miles an hour, to be completely honest. But since we have a mound and since there's slope sequencing, we have more space to cover with that front foot, which is essentially more time. What you're going to see is a segmentation breakdown, because notice the front foot at the point of when it anchors fully. You see how the trunk is starting its rotation. So it's initiating trunk rotation like early, which now, boom, we stabilize. So when I look at full anchor point, I look at calf like muscle contraction, which is basically like when that front foot really starts its block. So now what happens is this is when the front foot is starting its block. So when the knee stops going forward. So now what happens is you're moving together. So the shoulder and the rear hip, they start to move together. Although you did a great job of the timing of this hip rotation in relation to where your trunk is, it's because there's that again, we talk about like these motor patterns, and maybe sometimes you'll see a video on this in the report. Maybe sometimes we do so much flat ground sequencing that, look, on a flat ground, this is where you'd be landing right here. But since it's a mound, you have a little bit more space to cover due to the slope. So A, segmentation breakdown, it's a motor pattern, but B, it could also just be the number of reps on flat ground comparative to the mound, the slope sequencing. You'll see a video on how slope sequencing affects segmentation, but that's the biggest thing. We want to launch from stretch because we do a great job of the timing of hip rotation, but since there's more space to cover, we're just losing that rotational energy, right? So segmentation creates authentic separation. Separation creates that stretch. That's rotational energy to be released only at the point of which we anchor down. If it starts to be released, AKA trunk starting to rotate early, now we just lose tension in that rubber band. So instead of releasing that from like the full stretch position of a rubber band, we kind of ease some tension and then release. So we just want to optimize our slope sequencing. A lot of things that I talk about with guys that struggle with this, because I think Will does a pretty good job with it in sequencing. So I don't think it's so much motor pattern based. But what we want to do is we just want to start, increasing mound reps. That's not to say you got to throw a max intensity bullpen. Do some drill progressions on a slope. Throw your plyo balls on a slope. Do just a throwing session on a slope. Because the body is adapting to any stimuli you give it, essentially. All right. So if we just give it all this flat ground input, then it's just going to understand flat ground sequencing, and we want to obviously make it slope sequencing, because this is where we make our money. Right. It has this same kind of mechanism of loading drive leg with that trunk counter rotation and tilt. So you see that here. All right. And now as he gets closer into his anchor point, you can see, boom, that's segmentation. He's upwards to, 100 miles an hour. So what happens, or some things that I look at, is the back foot positioning. So the back foot positioning, right, is you can see the full, what's the underneath of a foot called? Not arch. Anyways, you can see the hole underneath the foot. That's given us a good indication of where his hips are through space as his front foot anchors down. So we know that his hips are well into rotation, and you can see that right here as well. And we give we look at the hand raise, right? So at the timing of which his hand climbs above that shoulder to give us a good indication of where his trunk is. So the trunk can't really initiate rotation until the hand gets up into that cocked, ready, fire position. All right. Neutral trunk, hips into rotation, segmentation, creating stretch, creating rotational energy to be released at the point of which he anchors down. Look at any high power output guy, and the sequencing of this is just unreal, right? The benefit of this is you increase your ability to segment. You not only increase your power output, but you take away a lot of stress off the arm, because when your upper body and lower body move together after you anchor down, you're having to rely a lot on your arm, right? Because you have this limited amount of rotational energy to be dispersed when you come into your throw.